history of the Nevins family that started out in Cleveland, Ohio. But it was a two-part. There were the Baskins and the Nevins. The Nevins started out with Bert Nevins, my dad's father, who was born on the 14th of September in 1864 in Cleveland. Grandma, Rachel, her maiden name was Silverman, and she was born July the 5th, 1870 in Cleveland. She originally came from Russia. My grandfather, on mom's side, Meyer Baskin, was born in Cleveland, December the 13th, 1884. My grandma, who we called Nanny, Helen, her maiden name was Riegelhaupt, was born May the 20th of 1885, and she came originally from Poland, with a background from an ethnicity of Hungarian with a temper to match. My father, Jack Maurice Nevins, was originally Maurice Jack, but he had it legally changed, was born September the 23rd, 1901. My mother, Gazella Baskin Nevins, she didn't have a middle name, so she always signed it Gazella B. Nevins, was born April the 8th, 1907. I was born December the 9th, 1927, with the name of Stanley Zale Nevins, and I guess the Zale came from the Hungarian part of my grandmother, who evidently didn't like me, since I didn't get the jewelry store, which she didn't have anything to do with anyway. I was born December the 9th, 1927. My sister Ruthie came on later in life, and it was Ruth Carol Nevins, but it's Ruthie, spelled R-U-T-H-E. I was born in Cleveland, needless to say, at the 25th Street Hospital in Cleveland. The first home we had that I knew of was 11710 Phillips Avenue, and we were living there for quite a while, and then we ended up over at 128th Street in a two-story family house. We always, for some reason, seemed to have the second floor. My brother Merle was born there October the 20th of 1931. Merle died February the 28th, 1933. He had an enlarged thymus gland, and they didn't know what it was, didn't know what to do, and unfortunately he suffocated. My dad's family was a rather large family. There were, originally, Grandma had 13 children, 2 of whom died early on, and one by the name of, they called him Pinky. I think his original name was Pincus. Was 13 and was swimming, dived off a pier at Lake Erie and hit a rock and died. So there were the surviving 10 that I'm aware of. My father, his sister Nettie was the oldest of the family, and Nettie had 3 children, Naomi, Paul, and Herschel, and their last name was Gusky, and they lived in Pennsylvania. Goldie married a man by the name of Carl Schultz, and he had a very successful grocery store. They never had any children. Carl was too involved with the store, and so was Goldie. Plus, he liked to take off and go to baseball games, and took me to my first baseball game at Cleveland Stadium to see the New York Yankees and the Cleveland Indians, and I got to see some of the more famous baseball players that there ever were. My Uncle Charlie, Charles Nevins, and he married a lady by the name of Loretto, and they have 2 children, Marcia and David. Marcia now lives in Minneapolis, David is somewhere in San Francisco. They had 2 children. Marcia had 2 daughters whose name I can't remember. I'm not that familiar with them, but they're all up there in Wisconsin, Minnesota. Then there was Sidney. Sidney worked for Grandpa in his saloon. Grandpa Nevins and his twin brother, Charlie, had a saloon which was the family business. I'll tell you a little bit about Grandpa a little later on. He married a lady by the name of Corrine, and they had 2 daughters, Sigrid and Susie. Then there was Henry and Aunt Gussie. She was a character. They had 2 children, Raleigh and Harlan. And then Uncle Jimmy, it was James Paul Nevins. Jimmy was in the Marines. He was a pharmacist to start out with. But when World War II came on, he decided he wanted to join the Marines. And Jimmy couldn't qualify because he didn't weigh enough. So he loaded up on bananas and water and made weight and then joined the Marine Corps, where they put him in special weapons, being a pharmacist. Our government at work. Then there was Pearl. She married a man from Austria by the name of Otto, who was an Olympic skier. And there were a lot of stories going along with that we'll get into in a little bit later. They had a daughter, Barbara. They did have a child prior to that who had a major problem, terrible deformity, and the baby lived for about 9 months, and as Mercy would have it, passed away finally. Then there was Sylvia, who married Roy Schweitzer, and they had the son, Roy Jr., who was a baseball player, went to the Ohio University, made All-American, small college, became an engineer, and disappeared off the map as far as the family was concerned. We have no idea where he's at. Then there was Annette. Antoinette was the rock. She kind of held it all together. She never married. She stayed home, took care of Grandma in her aging years, and was one of the sweetest, kindest people you'd ever want to meet. So that's kind of the history of those who started out at the house on 84th Street, which was the family house from the very beginning. It was a large house, to say the least. You had a big front porch, which had a swing on it, and you walked into this huge entry area where there was a piano. To your left was the living room. There was a large doorway from the entry into there. Then you had a hallway. Well, there was a set of stairs. You went up, but past that, there were a couple of doors that went down to the basement. On the other side of that was another set of stairs going upstairs that both met on the landing. And then went up to the top floor, where there were 3 bedrooms for a brood of 10. And the boys slept up in the attic. They had cots up there. The girls slept downstairs. Grandma and Grandpa had the 1 bedroom. The girls shared 2 other bedrooms. It was an interesting concept, to say the least. Grandpa Nevins would get up in the morning and start his day with what they used to refer to as 2 fingers of bourbon, except his 2 fingers were like that, and he had bigger hands than mine. Grandpa, God love him, I don't know how he had all the children. Grandpa drank all day long, smoked 20 or 30 black cigars a day, and died at 86. And someone said to my grandma, if he didn't smoke and drink, look how long he could have lived. And she said that wasn't what killed him, it was a strangulated hernia. So there goes another fallacy. Grandma lived to be 89. She was as wide as she was high, had shoulder-length hair, Came down, well, it came down actually to the middle of her back. And if you were good, you got to brush Grandma's hair. She had a rocking chair. She was an unbelievable cook. And she'd sit in the living room 1 hour a day and listen to her radio soap operas. One Man's Family, the Goldbergs, Stella Dallas, and one other. That was her break from the day. I never heard her raise her voice. She was one of the smoothest, quietest. Later on in life, if we'd have a family gathering, and Friday night was usually the time we had it, that was the family gathering and the table that would seat 14 to 15 to 16 people. And it was kind of you needed to be there if you could. And she never raised her voice. Later on, as I said, she'd be a family meeting, and the adult children, or my aunts and uncles, who had a tendency to disagree with one another every so often, would get into a heavy argument. And all of a sudden, you would hear a foot tap, and it would get very quiet. And that was Grandma's way of saying, enough. And they would stop. My Aunt Sylvia was chasing my cousin Junior around the dining room table for something he had done, trying to push this huge table to trap him in a corner. And Grandma said, "What are you doing?" "Well, I'm trying to catch him. He did this." She said, "You were no angel. Now, put the table back where it was. Junior, come talk to Grandma." And it got resolved. So, it was a wonderful life that you don't see too much anymore, with a very close-knit family that, unfortunately, as time passed, people moved, and it was no longer there. Some of the memories I had of some of the things going on at that family were Pearl and Otto. Otto, God love him, had a constipation problem one day, and Pearl told him to take some X-Lax. Otto, not understanding too well, took the whole box. And as he was up there in the only bathroom in that house, by the way, moaning and groaning, and Pearl was outside hollering at him like he could do anything about the situation. And it was always, "Oh, Otto." And my sister Ruthie's children at one point referred to him as Uncle O. Otto. So, things do stay with you. We moved to Tucson. Reason being, I got sick. In my early years, I went to Euclid Park Elementary School in Cleveland, and we moved a bit from that house on 128th Street. My father had worked for a grocery wholesaler, and with help from my Uncle Carl, opened his own grocery store at 165th and Euclid in Cleveland. And we moved into an apartment building just literally around the corner. And I have memories of that apartment building with the dark hallways and the smell of cooked cabbage, because it was an area that, in that area, was predominantly Italian or Polish. And they were always making stuffed cabbage for whatever reason. Later on, we moved to another apartment just down the street. Again, it was up on the third floor. My sister Ruthie was born. And Ruthie developed eczema, a skin condition. and it was bad. People by the name of Jerry Warren and his wife Midge owned a drugstore right down in the same block of buildings as our grocery store was. And one day they found a salve, a zinc ointment that worked, and they could never get it back the same way again. Well, I helped out in the store, such as it was, tried to clean the meat block, had to stand on an orange crate to try to use that silly wire brush. Tried to help stock the shelves. But going to Euclid Park Elementary School, we had to walk. If the weather was good, we walked. It was about a mile. And walked back home. And then we moved to a house out of 212th Street, way out in the boonies. I ended up at Nottingham Elementary School, which was my second taste of theater, my first actual play. At Euclid Park, I won a singing contest in kindergarten and got to be on the radio with it. But that was another thing also. Theater again, music, part of my life. Then we moved to this other apartment by the store. I was in the 9th grade, and we did a program about animals up on the stage in the auditorium. And my deal was I had a desert tortoise, which was sitting in my lap while I was waiting, and it peed on my pants for me. It was very lovely. For some reason, I don't know why, I walked home, and all of a sudden I didn't feel so good. And they called the doctor because I was running a fever. And they said I had rheumatic fever, which meant I couldn't go back to school. So I was out of school for 9 months. And when I went back to school, the kid next to me came down with scarlet fever, which I promptly got, which brought back the rheumatic fever, which went into something called chorea. They used to call it St. Vitus dance. There was no muscular control. That hit while I was lying on the couch and tried to get up from the couch and couldn't. I rolled off and somehow got from the living room to the bedroom, trying to open a doorknob, turn a doorknob with hands that didn't want to work, and somehow got into the bed. And they said there was a doctor from Vienna who said he could cure it. So they gave me typhoid fever artificially for 2 weeks, bring my temperature up to 103, pack me in ice to bring it back down. It didn't work, supposedly. They said I would never be able to live anywhere but a hot, dry climate, and so they sent me to Tucson to see if that would help. So Dad stayed at home in Cleveland. Mom and Ruthie and I went to Tucson. Took the train and rented the last house available and shared it with a mother and her daughter, Mrs. Gressel and her daughter Leah. And there was a small house, a little cottage out in the back of that house that we rented to a gentleman by the name of Abraham Lev, who had diabetes. My mom would have to give him his insulin shots. Ruthie was still having major problems with her eczema. It was, I was the only one she'd let pop the blisters on her feet. But we managed. And when we went to Arizona, I was 5'7" and I weighed 87 pounds. And the doctors had said, if I made it, I I'd never be able to do anything strenuous. I would be sterile from all high fevers. I have 6 children ranging in age from now, 35 to 59. So much for medical science. We went back to Cleveland, and I promptly got sick again. So we moved to Tucson, and Pop moved with us, Grandpa Nevins, Grandpa Baskin. Nanny had died while we were living in Cleveland, and Pop moved in with us. Of course, Mom had an Aunt Minnie, who was one of the few relatives I knew about that Nanny had, who kept a very kosher house and said it would be fine since we didn't keep kosher, until I had roast beef and took a glass of milk, and she about had a cow, and decided it was not going to be for her to live with us. But we went back to Tucson, rented a house at 2409 East 5th Street. And Ruthie was doing better there. She still had some flare-ups, but it was a lot better, actually, than it had been. And we went on from that point. Pop worked out of Davis Mountain Air Force Base, helped support the family. Dad sold the grocery store and moved to Tucson. Dad also had a history of eczema and had been in the hospital several times in Cleveland with it. And he promptly got it again and ended up going out to California to stay with Pop's sister, Stella. And we'll talk a little bit later on about Pop's family, which I never knew much about until just recently. She was able, by some sorts of treatments, to keep him, help him get better. Came back. The reason he got the eczema was Mom had started a little restaurant called The Place. And it was breakfast and lunch. And she was making her own pies, and she couldn't make them fast enough for these people. And from there, Dad got better and opened up a variety store on Speedway. Needles and pins and threads and novelty items. And one day, a man came in and said, this is during the war and materials were on ration and whatever. And he said, you ought to be in the electrical wiring business. My father said, are you crazy? He said, no, my family owns a electrical wholesale house in New York. And I can get you Romex and BX cable, and you could sell it like crazy. My dad said, I don't have that kind of money. There's $5,000 for all this wire. Well, Larry Kaplan, who was a friend that we had met while we were in Tucson, was quite wealthy. He would come visit us at our house and walk in the front door, sit down, read the newspaper, never say hello, goodbye, and just like it was his own home. Larry said, I'll do it, you pay me back when you sell it. So we got all this wire came in. And we didn't have any way to measure it, so we ran an ad in the paper, 2.5 and 3.5 cents a foot for the Romex, and then so much more for the BX cable, and it was gone in 4 hours. And then he said, well, you ought to have the switch boxes and the receptacles and the switches. And all of a sudden, we're in the electrical wholesale business. Well, we ended up moving to a bigger store in the same building. And A guy by the name of Joe Newman came in and wanted to borrow a ladder. And my dad loaned it to him, and he came back and he said, you got wiring, and you ought to have plumbing. What is it, plumbing? I'm not going to plumbing. Well, you can get the stuff. Well, how am I going to get it? I never had anything to do with it. Don't worry about it. Next thing I know, American Standard trucks are pulling up with toilets and lavatories and all kinds of plumbing fixtures. And we're selling the stuff. It's going out as fast as it's coming in. Well, my dad hired a guy by the name of Russ LeCanter to help him out because Russ was a plumber. Now all of a sudden we're into cast iron pipe and fittings and galvanized pipe and paint and electrical stuff. Well, it was interesting to say the least. I'm going to break on that and go to fill back in a little bit prior to all of this. I was in high school when we got back to Tucson. When we got to Tucson the second go-around. Ended up at Tucson High School. And got involved with theater. And it was interesting. The high school and Tucson Little Theater. And would fill in out on the coast every so often during the summer. I would go out and work in nightclubs out there as an MC and singing, and decided, had some offers to continue a professional career, and decided that there was no way I was going to be able to do that because I had a weakness for whiskey and women. I would go out to California at about 150, 160 pounds and come back at about 115, 120. So we never did follow through on that. I was going to the University of Arizona. I was in my junior year, and Russ LeCanter quit. Got mad at my father over something and quit. And I came home from school. And of course, everybody was upset. What are we going to do? Russ is gone. Who knows? Nobody knows anything about the plumbing end of it. Following morning, I went back to university and withdrew from all my classes. Walked in the store. My dad said, "What the hell are you doing here? You're supposed to be in school." And I said, "Somebody better be here that knows something about plumbing," which I did. Because I would work after school. I knew this stuff, and that's where we started with it. And then the plumbers would come in and throw a set of plans on the desk and say, we need an isometric layout for us to get our plumbing permit. And while you're at it, make out the material list. And I said to this one plumber, how did you get a license? You can't even do a material takeoff. He said, well, you couldn't get one. And I said, bet me. He said, I'll pay for your license and your bond if you can pass that test. And I said, you're on. So we did. I took the test. It was a 2-day test. Passed it. And so I had a plumbing contracting license. And we still had the wholesale house and the hardware store. And he said, why don't I come to work for you as a plumber, and you have a plumbing contracting company. And so we did. Team of plumbing contractors. Along with State Hardware and Supply, which is what the company became after it was State Variety and Supply. At that point, we moved to a bigger building, Clarence Swan and Speedway, specifically designed for what we were doing. The yard to store all the stuff in, and a lot more space. And guy came in and said to my dad, he said, I'm looking to buy a plumbing company. Is this, you got one for sale? And my dad, at that point, construction was starting to slow down. And my dad, I guess, said, how much money you got? And he sold it. So we were running quite a crew of trucks and plumbers. And meantime, we were starting to get involved in appliances and kitchen cabinets, and built an extension on the building, a special showroom, which had double contour laminated band beams with built-in track lighting, and the plumbing was designed so that all the fixtures worked. The kitchen's cabinets all were operative, ovens, ranges. Tucson Gas, Electric, Light, and Power would have their home economists set up women's club meetings in our showroom. And so that was ongoing. Well, while all this was going on, I got married in that little area somewhere to a lady by the name of Janice Elaine Rose. And from that marriage came Bruce, Michael, and Natalie. Bruce is still living in Tucson. Michael is in Virginia working for an engineering company. Jan, well, I'll have to backtrack a little bit. The kids came, and then you have to bear with me a minute. Sometimes the things don't get quite in sync. Jan and I were married for 20 years, and ended up getting a divorce, which was my fault, not hers. I met another lady, and from that came another daughter, Elizabeth. And then there was another marriage, and that was to Carol Ann. And from that marriage, Paul and Jerry. And Paul is the one who's doing the filming of this. So my sister Ruthie and her children and the offsprings that come from my children or their offspring will have some idea of the family and how we got to where we're at. We had the showroom, and of course, my father and I did not get along all that well. He would say, do something, and I'd do it, then he'd say, why did you do that? Well, we didn't realize that he was going in the early stages of Alzheimer's, which wasn't even known. They just call it hardening of the arteries. And he and I had a royal blow up, and I quit. Told him, he's got the business, you keep it. Well, Jan was working for a real estate company, and they were looking to do some building. So I ended up getting a building contracting license. And also it had a kitchen and bath remodeling license. And we did some kitchen and bath remodeling while still at State Hardware and Supply. So as you can see, my life has been a little on the varied side. But it all goes to the family. Um, Ruthie married Murray Rogo, who was a pharmaceutical student at the University of Arizona. And Ruthie has 5 children, and they're in San Diego. Ruthie is my only sibling, who I dearly love, and he has asked me to do a history of the family and some of the things that transpired, because there's all kinds of anecdotes that goes along with what I've been talking about as far as the family members are concerned. Things about Pop and things that went on. Mom was one hell of a lady. She, while I was little, when I was born, she was working at Halle Brothers in Cleveland in the women's dress section. And she was a house mama until we moved to Tucson. And she got involved with Temple Emmanuel, which was part of they had an old church building over on 6th Avenue. And Mom always did things full bore, no slow down. She got involved with the sisterhood. And the group of the temple decided they needed a bigger location. And so she and Dad got involved with the building committee, and they built Temple Emmanuel Country Club Road in Tucson. Mom was ended up being the president of the sisterhood, lifetime emeritus president of the sisterhood. Dad was president of the Temple Men's Club for 4 years, president of the Temple for 4 years. At one point, I was president of the Temple unmarried set, young married set, and Ruthie, I believe, was president of the Temple youth group. I guess if the Nevinses weren't president, we didn't play. But Mom always said, at least to me, that we're put here to help somebody, some way, somehow, sometime. We don't know who, what, where, when, or how often. But if God gives us the strength to do it and we don't, then shame on us. She also said, the position you are seeking is seeking you. God lovingly, willingly brings need and want together for mutual good. God is love, and love fills all spaces. Therefore, there is no room for anything unlike good. She was a wonderful lady. She had many, many friends. When Mom passed away, the temple was filled to overflowing, as it was with Dad. I came back from out of town. When I moved, go back again a little bit. I probably should have written more of this down in context, but after the divorce, I moved to Phoenix with Carol, and that's where Jerry was born. I was working for Horizon Land Corporation as a salesman, and then became one of their national training managers. But that really wasn't my cup of tea. We did well with it. But I got a job with Wix Corporation, which had a division called Yorktown Cabinets that we'd been a distributor for in Tucson. And so I had a region of Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Louisiana, and I had to move into my region before they'd let me fly. So I was driving that region from Phoenix. And so we ended up moving to Tulsa because Carol had a friend there. and I was with Wix, and then ended up going with Triangle Pacific Corporation in 1976. At that point, I had to move because my region was Kansas, Missouri, Nebraska, Iowa, North and South Dakota, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Southern Illinois, and a warehouse in Kansas City, St. Louis, Des Moines, and Minneapolis. So we moved here to Grandview, and this is where we still are. Carol died, and the boys were 10 and 12 at that point. And so I was single for a while and married Nancy Cross, who has 5 children. And Nancy and I are still married, and her son John and his wife Megan live with us. Meg has MS. John's an IT tech. Jerry and Paul both went to Northwest Missouri State. They graduated from Grandview High School. Jerry has worked for State Farm since he graduated college. Paul is heavily involved in computer stuff and visual aids and Flash. I don't know what it is, but he does good at it. I'm very proud of him, and Jerry both. So here we are talking about family. To get back to the other family, the Major family, the Nevinses, just some things that are not a record of. There is a record, however, a picture that Paul and Jerry and I have, and Ruthie has, of Grandma and Grandpa's 50th wedding anniversary in the saloon. Grandpa and his twin brother, Charlie, had the saloon. All of my uncles worked there, including Dad. Dad worked for a grocer for a while, Mr. Hochheiser, and went on deliveries, and he wanted to get them done in a hurry, and so he was horse-drawn carriage, and got back, and the horse was sweating, and he looked like he needed something, so Dad gave him some cold water, and the horse dropped dead, and that was my dad's and the end of the grocery delivery business with Mr. Hochheiser. Grandpa's saloon was right close to the Cleveland Indians and Cleveland Browns practice field. And my cousin Junior and I played sandlot baseball. And it was literally sandlot. There was no grass. White stripes on the dirt. My Uncle Sidney sent a couple of the major ball players over to show us how to turn a double play. One was Lou Boudreau and the other was Joe Gordon, both in the Hall of Fame. And Junior and I both ended up having 2 left feet and thumbs on both hands, 5 of them. 2 of your idols trying to show you something, and that was a great thing for me to have. But Uncle Carl would be there at Grandma's and would doze off in the chair, and he had false teeth, and they'd be kind of hanging there. Somebody would say something or a loud noise, and he'd jump up and have to pick up his false teeth off the floor. The atmosphere of that family and that house was nothing but warm. Over the years, I have tried to stay in touch with my cousins. Herschel is still alive. He is in Phoenix. Herschel's 2 years older than I am. Paul is long since deceased. He moved to Tucson. He passed away there. Naomi died early in life. She had wanted to have as many children as Grandma, she said. And she only ended up having 5 and died of ovarian cancer. Raleigh was in a nursing home in Cleveland, and I believe passed away because there's no trace. We've been trying to catch up with that. But, Harvey was in the furniture business and moved to North Carolina, and haven't been able to catch up with him and find him. Susan is in Phoenix. She was married to a man by the name of Paul Bracker down in Nogales. They got divorced, and she moved to Phoenix and is still there. I talk to her every so often. Sigrid, her husband Jim, passed away in April in Tucson. They've been between Montana and Tucson. She goes down there for the winters. Jan died in Tucson in April. She had a company called Bonnets and Stems and Accessories, Plumbing Parts House. And I tried to help her get stuff she needed because in the interim I've become again involved with plumbing stuff. She died in April. Bruce has taken over the business. They're hanging in with it. But it's a golden goose. He just doesn't know how to get the golden eggs out of it. I do talk to Sigrid every so often. Her husband died the same day that Jan did, and I didn't even know it. Didn't know she was there. She didn't know I was there. But we stayed together. David, Marcia I talked to in Wisconsin, see how she's doing. Jimmy had 2 children. Stephen was with June. June was married to somebody else prior to Jimmy's coming home from the war. And she was his first love. And she had a son, Roger, that Jimmy adopted. I said Jimmy was a pharmacist. He had some ethical drugstores in Cleveland and sold them and moved to Tucson. He was going to go into business with my father. And he and my father did not get along. So Jimmy got involved in hydroponics and set up a deal growing vegetables and stuff hydroponically. Ended up selling it to American Airlines. And then bought a flower shop. Jimmy and I were very close. I loved him dearly. He was kind of my favorite uncle. He'd come home from the Marine Corps on leave, and I'd get to wear his hat. He'd come home, when I was little, he'd come home from Sunday school, from Hebrew school. I'd say I was going to Hebrew school with him. But it didn't work out that way. But Jimmy broke my heart when he died. He had, in the Marine Corps, they offered him a full colonel's ranking if he'd stay. But he lost the hearing in both ears because of being in special weapons. And got an ear infection from one of his hearing aids, and they couldn't cure it. It did something to him, his system, and it killed him. Stayed in touch with June. and Stephen. And Stephen ended up going to work for Supercuts. He was their national treasurer in San Francisco. He's now working for Temple Emmanuel part-time, helping out the rabbi with some stuff. Don't know what all that's about, but he's there. Roger, nobody knows where. He's been in all kinds of problems with the law. Who else? Take a look at my notes here. Oh, Barbara, Pearlinato's daughter, is in Cleveland. She's administrator at a nursing home there. I have gotten away from my original roots as far as any religion is concerned. When I married Nancy, Nancy was raised Roman Catholic, and after she was divorced, of course, the church said she could have couldn't have communion or anything else to do with the church unless she got a divorce, an annulment, which meant I'd have to get an annulment and all the rest of stuff. And so, a friend of hers recommended the Episcopal Church, St. Matthew's. And she came home after a couple of visits there and said, "Will I go with her?" And I said, "Yeah, why not? I can worship God wherever I go." And so we've been going there, and then Nancy decided, or God decided for her, I guess, stuff she was involved with hospice, and we both became lay chaplains in Community of Hope. She had a calling for the diaconate. It was a 7-year process. And she became ordained a year ago, this past June, June the 5th, and is now the deacon at St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Lee Summit. Nancy got her so-called baptism of fire. Her sister, Mary Kay, died the Thursday before her ordination. She did a sermon on the Sunday after her ordination. Following Monday, we went up to St. Charles, Illinois, and she did her sister's funeral service on Tuesday. Nancy quit her job at Shook, Hardy, and Bacon after 18 years when they called her from St. Joseph Hospital to be in their chaplaincy program, and is still doing chaplaincy work for St. Luke's Hospital and for the Diocese of West Missouri. There are a lot of things with this family. At the present time, I'm trying to find out more about Pop. Pop lived with us, as I said, in Cleveland. He was a character. Pop gave me some things to live by, too. He said, you do what you can, and you can the rest. If it's out of your control and you can't do anything about it, shut up and go do something else. If you let it get you, it's going to get you. So the moral of the story is, don't let it get you. Pop was my roommate when we lived in Tucson. We shared a bedroom together for years. He lived with us in Cleveland after Nanny died. Of course, he helped out in the grocery store with Dad. But he was actually had worked on the freight docks for years. He knew life. He didn't have a whole lot of formal education. But Pop was a great guy. He was my roomie. And Pop, we found out just recently, I only knew he had a sister Eva, sister Stella, and a brother Al. And found out someone called Ruthie, Stella's daughter Dorothy, just recently passed away at 98. And Ruthie was in touch with her and we visited her. She was out in California. And when Dorothy died, Ruthie's name and mine were listed on the obituary. And a lady called Ruthie and wanted to know about her because she was a niece of Dorothy's. Well, it seems Pop had more family than what I knew. He had a sister Hannah. Of course, there was Bertha, Ben, Rose, Eva, Stella, Al, and then Pop. I'm trying to find out more through Rose, who was the woman that called Ruthie, about Pop's family. And when I do, we'll try to get more story filmed so that you all can have it. And we may add on to this or edit it, I don't know. We may find to get some pictures involved about the family. Ruthie is coming to visit me here 24th of August this year, 2011. And is going to hopefully bring the family scrapbook that Mom had, that she got, and that had a bunch of stuff from the family in it. So, for now, I think we'll call it a halt and hopefully maybe continue on a little further from this.